The 1970s were a wild time for food. While some dishes became legends, many incredible recipes have faded into history.
One of the favorite leftover dishes is lamb pot pie.
But today, we're bringing them back. These are the recipes from the 70s that you need to eat in your lifetime. In the heart of American home kitchens, practicality and comfort dictated what ended up on the dinner table. The 1970s were no different, embracing meals that were both economical and satisfying. One dish that embodied this philosophy was chicken in a biscuit casserole, a simple yet filling combination of shredded chicken enveloped in a creamy, savory sauce, all crowned with golden, flaky biscuit dough. Though its origins are difficult to pinpoint, dishes like this became increasingly common as canned soups and refrigerated dough products surged in popularity. Convenience was king, and busy households needed meals that could be prepared with minimal effort, yet deliver maximum comfort. The emergence of electric ovens in nearly every home made baking casseroles an everyday affair, and this particular dish quickly earned its place at dinner tables across the country. Biscuits had long been a staple in rural American cuisine, and combining them with a hearty, protein-rich filling was a logical step forward. Today, modern interpretations lean toward health-conscious adaptations, replacing condensed soups with homemade roux-based sauces or swapping in whole wheat biscuits. Scandals and desserts don't usually go hand in hand, but in the 1970s, one particular cake proved otherwise. Watergate cake, a pistachio pudding-infused dessert layered with whipped topping and coconut, became a culinary icon of the decade, not just for its light, nutty flavor, but for the mystery surrounding its name. The origins of the cake are as murky as the scandal it's tied to. While some believe it was named after the Watergate hearings that dominated headlines in the early 70s, others suggest it was a marketing ploy by General Foods, the company behind instant pistachio pudding. What's certain is that Watergate cake became a fixture at potlucks, luncheons, and community gatherings, appealing to those who wanted something sweet with a hint of intrigue. Culturally, the cake represented the era's obsession with instant ingredients and no-fuss baking. Boxed cake mix, pudding powder, and whipped topping were the backbone of convenience cooking, allowing home bakers to create impressive-looking desserts with minimal effort. Few dishes capture the essence of 1970s home cooking quite like a hearty casserole. Built on layers of ground beef, sliced potatoes, and condensed soup, hamburger potato bake was a staple in American households looking for a meal that was both economical and filling. Casseroles had already been a kitchen favorite for decades, but by the 70s their popularity soared thanks to the widespread availability of convenience foods. Canned soups, frozen vegetables, and pre-shredded cheese made it easier than ever to put together a meal without spending hours in the kitchen. Dishes like this weren't just about nourishment, they were about efficiency. This particular recipe found a home in rural communities and suburban neighborhoods alike, offering an easy way to stretch a pound of ground beef into a meal that could feed an entire family. Modern adaptations often swap canned soup for homemade sauces and experiment with different seasonings, but at its core, this dish remains unchanged. A testament to the time when dinner meant gathering around the table, sharing a meal that was made to last. Decadent, savory, and packed with flavor, stuffed meats were a sign of a well-prepared meal in mid-century America. By the 1970s, home cooks were finding ways to elevate traditional dishes without breaking the bank, and stuffed deviled chops became a standout example. The idea of stuffing pork chops wasn't new, but the addition of a spicy mustard-infused breadcrumb mixture gave this dish its signature deviled twist. Deviling, a term that dates back to the 18th century, refers to the practice of adding bold seasonings like mustard and pepper to intensify flavor. By the time this recipe gained popularity, deviled eggs had already cemented their place in American cuisine, and this pork dish followed suit. Culturally, stuffed deviled chops fit right into the era's love of hearty oven-baked meals. While modern cooking often leans toward leaner cuts and lighter flavors, this dish still has a place on the table. Today's versions might swap out white breadcrumbs for whole grain alternatives or introduce apple-based stuffing for a sweet-savory balance. But one thing remains unchanged. Few desserts from the 1970s could match the sheer visual spectacle of crown jewel dessert. Vibrant cubes of gelatin suspended in a creamy, airy mixture created a dish that looked as extravagant as it sounded. Behind its dazzling appearance was a dessert born from convenience, creativity, and the decade's undeniable love of gelatin. Gelatin-based dishes had been a fixture in American cookbooks for decades. But by the mid-20th century, they had evolved from simple fruit molds into elaborate, almost sculptural creations. Crown jewel dessert, also called broken glass cake, was a natural extension of this trend. With its bright jewel-toned cubes carefully arranged in a fluffy, citrus-infused base, it became a popular choice for dinner parties where presentation mattered just as much as taste. Modern versions lean toward natural colorings and homemade fruit gelées, but the original's playful spirit remains intact. It reflected the era's enthusiasm for processed ingredients and minimal-effort elegance. Made using boxed gelatin and whipped topping, it was a dessert that looked impressive but required little skill. With the airy texture of a soufflé but the sliceability of a loaf, cheese soufflé loaf was the kind of dish that looked sophisticated but remained approachable, a reflection of how home cooking evolved in the 1970s. This was a decade where French-inspired cuisine gained traction in American households. But not everyone had the time or patience for a traditional soufflé. Enter this clever alternative. By baking cheese, eggs, and a small amount of flour into a structured loaf, home cooks could achieve the delicate, airy texture of a soufflé without worrying about the dreaded collapse. It was a shortcut to sophistication, offering the best of both worlds. Cheese had already been a staple of mid-century cooking, and this dish fit perfectly into the era's love of rich, baked cheese-based recipes. Some versions incorporated sharp cheddar, while others leaned into milder flavors like Swiss or Gruyere. Delicate, and just the right amount of indulgent, Spanish cream custard was the kind of dessert that felt fancy without demanding hours in the kitchen. A cross between a classic custard and a gelatin dessert, it relied on eggs, milk, and just enough gelatin to give it structure without turning it into a firm mold. The result? A silky, airy treat with a texture somewhere between pudding and mousse. Custards had been a fixture in European and American cooking for centuries, but by the 1970s, home cooks were looking for lighter, more effortless desserts. Spanish cream custard fit the bill. It delivered the richness of a traditional custard while requiring less time over the stove. The added gelatin also gave it an edge, allowing it to hold its shape while still melting on the tongue. Culturally, this dish reflected the era's growing appreciation for international flavors. By the 1970s, meatloaf had already cemented its place as a weeknight staple in American households. But as the decade embraced tropical influences in cooking, a new variation emerged: Hawaiian meatloaf. Blending the hearty comfort of ground beef with the sweetness of crushed pineapple and a tangy glaze. The idea of pairing pineapple with savory dishes wasn't new. Hawaiian-inspired recipes had surged in popularity during the mid-20th century, largely due to the post-war fascination with Polynesian cuisine. The rise of tiki culture, fueled by themed restaurants and island-inspired cocktails, led home cooks to experiment with sweet and savory flavor combinations. Resourcefulness has always been a defining trait of home cooking, and few dishes exemplify that better than bologna cups. A simple yet inventive creation, this dish transformed a humble slice of bologna into an edible vessel filled with mashed potatoes, eggs, or even creamed vegetables. What started as a budget-friendly meal quickly became a quirky favorite in American kitchens during the 1970s. Bologna had long been a staple of frugal cooking, especially in post-war America, when processed meats were widely available and inexpensive. By the time the 70s rolled around, bologna wasn't just for sandwiches anymore. It was being fried, stuffed, and repurposed in ways that made it feel like something more than just a lunchbox filler. Fried bologna was already a Southern tradition, but shaping it into crispy golden cups took it to another level, offering both texture and versatility. Bright, jiggly, and packed with unexpected ingredients, gelatin salads were a staple at potlucks, holiday gatherings, and church suppers. Few embodied the era's love for playful food quite like 7-Up salad, a sweet and citrusy concoction that combined lime JELL-O, crushed pineapple, mini marshmallows, and, of course, 7-Up for an extra fizzy lift. The fascination with gelatin-based dishes stretched back decades. But by the mid-20th century, food manufacturers were marketing them as versatile, family-friendly options. JELL-O was no longer just a simple dessert. It was the foundation for countless salads that often blurred the line between side dish and dessert. Sometimes the best recipes come from pure necessity. During the Great Depression and World War II, home cooks had to get creative with what was available, leading to some truly unexpected flavor combinations. By the time the 1970s rolled around, one of those Depression-era inventions was still making the rounds in American kitchens: tomato soup cake, a spice dessert that sounded unusual but delivered surprising results. The acidity from the tomatoes helped enhance the cake's warm spices, typically cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves, while also ensuring a soft, tender crumb. Despite its name, this wasn't a savory dish. The soup acted as a background player, subtly enriching the flavors rather than making it taste like a bowl of marinara. This cake reflected the era's frugality and ingenuity. What began as a wartime rationing trick had become a nostalgic favorite by the 70s, passed down through generations and featured in community cookbooks. Mold presentation mattered in 1970s dining, and few dishes made a bolder visual statement than salmon mousse mold. A blend of canned salmon, cream cheese, and gelatin, this pastel-hued creation was shaped in decorative molds, often fish-shaped for maximum effect. What might seem like an eccentric relic today was once a centerpiece at cocktail parties and elegant luncheons. The origins of molded fish dishes date back centuries, but by the mid-20th century, gelatin-based foods had become a symbol of sophistication. Few ingredients have been as beloved in American kitchens as peanut butter. By the 1970s, it was a household staple, appearing in everything from sandwiches to desserts. But one of the most overlooked creations of the time was peanut butter bread, a no-yeast, one-bowl quick bread that delivered all the nutty richness of peanut butter in a dense, satisfying loaf. The concept of peanut butter as a baking ingredient wasn't new. During the Great Depression and wartime rationing, recipes like this emerged as a way to make filling, protein-packed foods with minimal ingredients. In the Midwest, a casserole isn't just a meal, it's a tradition. And few dishes capture that spirit better than church supper hot dish, a hearty, no-fuss recipe that combined ground beef, canned corn, a creamy sauce, and a golden layer of tater tots. Simple, filling, and built to feed a crowd, it became a staple at potlucks, family gatherings, and, of course, church suppers. Hot dish itself dates back to the early 20th century, originally created as an affordable way to stretch ingredients in Minnesota's Lutheran communities. By the 1970s, it had evolved into something more than just a budget meal. It was comfort food at its best. The key ingredients rarely changed: a protein, a vegetable, something creamy to bind it all together, and a starchy topping to bring the crunch. Some dishes from the 1970s leave you wondering, who thought of this? One such creation was savory JELL-O salad with cheese, a dish that combined lemon or lime gelatin with shredded cheese, celery, and olives, a contrast of textures and flavors that defied culinary logic. But in its time, this was considered a perfectly respectable addition to the dinner table. The origins of savory gelatin dishes go back much further than the 70s. In the early 20th century, molded gelatin salads were a symbol of refinement, appearing in cookbooks as an elegant way to serve vegetables. By the mid-century, food manufacturers promoted gelatin as an all-purpose ingredient, leading to experimental combinations that at times challenged the boundaries of good taste. This dish reflected the era's enthusiasm for processed foods and culinary convenience. Canned olives, pre-shredded cheese, and boxed gelatin meant that home cooks could assemble it quickly, often for potlucks or holiday spreads. The result? A wobbly, salty-sweet creation that, while visually striking, wasn't exactly for everyone. For much of the 20th century, organ meats weren't just a choice, they were a necessity. Nutrient-dense, affordable, and widely available, they found their way into countless dishes, including one that stood out in the 1970s, savory liver loaf, a meatloaf-style creation made with ground liver, onions, breadcrumbs, and eggs. It was a dish designed to be both economical and nourishing. Liver had long been a staple in European and American diets, valued for its high iron and vitamin content. But by the mid-century, as convenience foods took center stage, traditional preparations gave way to recipes that aimed to make liver more approachable, baking it into a loaf format. Often with a touch of mustard or Worcestershire sauce, was one way to mask its strong flavor and present it as a familiar comfort food. Few breakfast dishes are as deeply tied to American food history as corned beef hash, a hearty mix of corned beef, potatoes, and onions. It had been a favorite among working-class families and military rations long before the 1970s. But as the decade embraced casserole culture, one version took center stage: corned beef hash bake, a layered breakfast dish with eggs and cheese, baked until golden and bubbly. Hash itself has origins dating back centuries, brought to America by European immigrants who believed in using every scrap of meat. By the mid-20th century, canned corned beef had become a pantry staple thanks in part to its role in wartime rations. It was affordable, shelf-stable, and when mixed with potatoes, it stretched into a meal that could feed an entire family. By the 1970s, Americans were starting to embrace lighter, more refreshing dishes, especially during the hot summer months. One that stood out was chilled fruit soup, a blend of fresh fruit, yogurt, and honey, served cold as a vibrant alternative to heavier desserts. It wasn't just a trend, it was a reflection of the era's growing interest in health-conscious eating and international flavors. Cold fruit soups had existed for centuries in European and Asian cuisines, but in the U.S. they gained popularity alongside the natural foods movement as people began looking for alternatives to processed sweets. Dishes like this provided a naturally sweet, nutrient-rich option. Plus, it was incredibly versatile. Different fruits could be used depending on what was in season, and the addition of yogurt added creaminess without making it overly indulgent. This dish aligned with the rise of blender-based recipes, which had exploded in popularity thanks to the increasing availability of home blenders and food processors. Some versions leaned tropical, using mangoes or pineapples, while others kept it classic with strawberries and peaches. Modern adaptations have expanded the concept further, incorporating ingredients like coconut milk or chia seeds for extra texture. By the 1970s, the American love affair with casseroles and baked side dishes was in full swing. Sweet potato pineapple pudding was one such creation, a rich, oven-baked dish that combined mashed sweet potatoes with juicy pineapple chunks and brown sugar, resulting in a balance of earthy sweetness and bright tropical flavor. Sweet potatoes had been a staple in Southern and African American cooking for centuries, often baked, mashed, or turned into pies. But by the mid-20th century, recipes began incorporating canned pineapple, a product that had surged in popularity thanks to improved canning techniques and the rise of Hawaiian-inspired flavors. The natural acidity of pineapple helped enhance the sweetness of the potatoes, while brown sugar and butter ensured every bite was decadent. This dish frequently appeared on holiday tables alongside ham or turkey, bridging the gap between savory and sweet. Today, modern adaptations replace canned pineapple with fresh fruit or introduce maple syrup as a sweetener, but the core concept remains the same, a simple yet indulgent dish that proves some flavor combinations never go out of style. Fine dining in the mid-20th century had a clear message. If it could be molded, it should be. That philosophy extended even to seafood, which led to the rise of shrimp aspic, a gelatin-based dish that once graced the most elegant dinner party tables. A mix of shrimp, tomato juice, gelatin, and seasonings, this dish was as much about presentation as it was about flavor, often molded into intricate shapes and served with crackers or greens. Aspics had been a symbol of culinary refinement for centuries, originally reserved for aristocratic banquets. By the 1970s, gelatin dishes had become a fixture in American kitchens, blending convenience with an air of sophistication. Shrimp aspic followed the trend, combining the growing availability of canned seafood with the era's fascination with molded foods. This dish reflected the decade's changing food culture, where people sought recipes that could be prepared ahead of time yet still impressed guests. Some versions leaned into a cocktail sauce-like flavor profile, while others incorporated mayonnaise for a creamier consistency. Regardless of the variation, aspic was meant to be admired before it was eaten, and possibly questioned by those unfamiliar with its wobbly texture. By the 1970s, cocktail party food had one job: to be easy, crowd-pleasing, and just a little unexpected. Enter grape jelly meatballs, a dish that sounded improbable but delivered a sweet, savory, and slightly spicy kick. Made by simmering meatballs in a sauce of grape jelly and chili sauce, it became a go-to appetizer for home entertainers who wanted something that felt homemade without much effort. The origins of this dish can be traced back to mid-century frugality and convenience cooking. Meatballs had always been a budget-friendly option, and pairing them with a sauce that combined pantry staples made perfect sense. Grape jelly, once considered only a breakfast spread, found a second life in savory dishes, where its fruity sweetness balanced out the tangy spice of chili sauce. Culturally, this dish reflected the changing nature of social gatherings. The rise of slow cookers and chafing dishes made it easier to serve warm appetizers that could sit out for hours without constant attention. Some variations added Worcestershire sauce for depth, while others swapped out chili sauce for barbecue sauce to dial up the smokiness. Desserts in the 1970s often embraced rich, indulgent flavors, and few combinations were as beloved as coconut and pecans. Somewhere between a blondie and a German chocolate cake, coconut-pecan frosting bars delivered a chewy, buttery base topped with a gooey, caramelized layer of coconut. and chopped pecans, a dessert designed to satisfy even the most serious sweet tooth. This dish was a natural evolution of German chocolate cake's signature frosting, which had been popular since the 1950s. Instead of spreading that decadent mixture over layers of cake, home bakers in the 70s experimented by baking it into a sturdy, portable bar format. The result? A treat that was just as rich but far easier to serve at potlucks, bake sales, and coffee hours. Boxed cake mixes and condensed milk simplified dessert making, allowing anyone to whip up a sweet treat without the precision of scratch baking. Some variations incorporated chocolate chips or toffee bits for an extra layer of indulgence, while others leaned on brown sugar and vanilla to enhance the nuttiness. Today, modern versions reduce the sugar content or swap in alternative flours, but the essence remains unchanged. In the 1970s, space travel wasn't just a scientific achievement, it was a cultural phenomenon. And in the world of food, few products embodied that excitement more than Tang, the powdered orange drink famously associated with NASA's Gemini missions. But astronauts weren't the only ones consuming it. Home cooks found a way to turn this citrusy powder into something entirely unexpected. Tang pie, a no-bake dessert that blended the drink mix into a creamy citrus-flavored filling. Instant foods were at their peak, and Tang was marketed as the futuristic alternative to fresh juice. Its intense orange flavor and long shelf life made it a natural fit for the era's obsession with convenience cooking. Recipes for Tang pie began circulating in community cookbooks, often calling for a mix of tang, sweetened condensed milk, and whipped topping, all set inside a graham cracker crust. The result was a dessert that tasted like a creamsicle in pie form, bright, tangy, and undeniably nostalgic. Some versions added vanilla extract for extra depth, while others experimented with different flavors of powdered drink mixes. Modern variations use real citrus juice instead of tang, but for those who grew up with it, this pie remains a bite of pure 1970s nostalgia, one spoonful at a time. Resourcefulness has always played a major role in American home cooking, and few dishes demonstrate that better than ham salad spread. Made from finely chopped ham mixed with mayonnaise and often combined with pickles or boiled eggs, this spread was a staple at gatherings, offering an easy, budget-friendly way to repurpose leftover ham. The concept of meat-based spreads wasn't new. Versions of ham salad had been appearing in cookbooks since the early 20th century, evolving from European-style potted meats. By the 1970s, as convenience foods dominated kitchens, this dish became even more popular, especially for church socials, picnics, and family potlucks. With a texture somewhere between pâté and tuna salad, it was versatile enough to be served on sandwiches, crackers, or even stuffed into celery sticks for an appetizer tray. Culturally, this dish reflected a time when no food went to waste. Leftover holiday ham could be transformed into a completely new meal with just a few simple ingredients. Some variations leaned tangy, using sweet relish or mustard, while others took a creamier approach with extra mayo or a touch of sour cream. If we take a look at how porcupine meatballs made their claim to fame, the answer is pretty straightforward. You take canned food, a sauce that's been simplified for everyday use, and budget-friendly, high-quality meatballs, and you have an easy winner in the eyes of the people. This dish costs nothing to make and requires the simplest of ingredients. It's probably all stuff you already have in your home, to be honest. How often do we really find ourselves without any onions or rice? The sauce might be a bit tricky if you're new to it, but any canned tomato sauce would work too. All in all, it's extremely beginner-friendly. It caught on because between the casseroles, the meatloaves, and the pot roasts, people needed something different but similar enough that it could work for them on a daily basis. What they ended up finding was porcupine meatballs, among many things. But the recipe is largely forgotten nowadays. You just don't get to see it being made much in households. Probably because prices are much higher than they used to be, and because there's been a massive rise in takeout culture on top of it all. Its golden days in the 1950s and 1970s are ancient history now. Canned tuna was cheap, packed with protein, and could be turned into everything from tuna salads, sandwiches, to casseroles. Families relied on it for quick meals, and no one thought twice about how much they ate. Back then, there were no warning labels, no recommendations to limit consumption, just endless recipes encouraging people to make the most of their pantry supply. But there was a hidden problem. Industrial pollution had been steadily increasing mercury levels in ocean fish, and tuna, being a top predator, was absorbing more than its fair share. By 1970, reports surfaced linking mercury in tuna to potential neurological damage, particularly in pregnant women and young children. The FDA took action, setting limits on mercury levels in fish, but there was no official warning on cans. It wasn't until the early 2000s that the government issued clear guidelines advising consumers, especially expectant mothers, to limit their intake of certain tuna varieties. Despite the concerns, canned tuna never disappeared from store shelves. It's still a go-to meal for millions, but with a little more caution attached. Squash might not be our top pick on a regular day, but Grandma's squash casserole was so irresistible that we found ourselves going back for seconds, or even thirds. This casserole was a staple in Southern cuisine and was Grandma's favorite way of sneaking nutrients into our dinner. Squash is rich in vitamins A and C, potassium, and fiber, making it a wholesome choice. This dish was typically famous in the summer when squash was available in abundance, but you could freeze the veggie and enjoy it all year round, too. Squash casserole was highly customizable, meaning Grandma could tweak it by adding cooked bacon, sausage, or even fresh herbs. The secret ingredient that gave this dish its unique taste was a dash of hot sauce. So next time you attempt making this dish for a potluck, don't forget the key ingredient. Thank me later. Pot roasts have been as much a part of the grand scheme of American culture and cuisine as anything else on this list, and each area, state, and neighborhood has their own ideas of what one should look like. Were you the kind of kid that grew up on beef chuck roast, potatoes, a beefy broth, and carrots in your roast? Maybe you had boneless chuck roast, olive oil, bay leaves, and similar ingredients instead. These are just a few variations you can expect to find when it comes to a good, well-done pot roast. The perfect party dish, or a great one to pull out for an incredibly large family dinner with the in-laws and extended family. This is one dish that never fails to pull through, especially when a seasoned cook is behind it. Poke cake hit the scene in the 70s and got everyone excited because you could do so much with it. After baking a simple vanilla or chocolate cake, you poke holes all over it and fill those up with JELL-O, pudding, or sweetened condensed milk. This trick lets the filling soak into the cake, making it super moist and adding layers of flavor. JELL-O pushed this idea big time, showing everyone how a plain cake could turn into a showstopper. It was a hit because you could tweak it with different fillings depending on what you were into, but as tastes got more sophisticated and folks leaned toward less sugary stuff, poke cake kind of lost its spotlight. It was usually served in a big dish, looking casual and family-friendly. You'd often see it with a fluffy layer of whipped cream on top, maybe some fruit or sprinkles too, just to make those flavors pop. We're going to continue the casserole show with Alpine chicken. This one got popular for more or less the same reasons the other ones did. However, it had an extra kick that they didn't, and that was the addition of Swiss cheese. Americans will never get tired of a dish if it has a decent helping of cheese in it, so you shouldn't be too surprised that this stuck in the minds of eaters and families like glue. Alpine chicken typically uses cream of mushroom soup and breadcrumbs, or a stuffing mix layered in a dish that gets cooked until the cheese is melted. You also have your typical chicken breasts involved, but some people go for the thighs. It peaked in popularity during the post-war era when people really started looking for more ease in their cooking rather than sweating buckets after a day in the kitchen. You know how when you cook something, you rarely feel like eating it immediately? It's because cooking is a soul-sucking endeavor. It doesn't have to be, thanks to things like crock-pots and recipes like ALPINE chicken, which bring the fun back to food and make sure you actually get to rest and replenish that stamina tank. By the 1970s, margarine had secured its place as the healthier alternative to butter. It was cheaper, lasted longer, and thanks to trans fats, stayed solid at room temperature while giving baked goods that perfect flakiness. Fast food chains and restaurants took full advantage, using partially hydrogenated oils for frying everything from French fries to fried chicken. The result? Crispy, golden perfection with a long shelf life. But what seemed like a miracle ingredient turned out to be a silent killer. Trans fats raised bad cholesterol, lowered good cholesterol, and increased the risk of heart disease without people even realizing it. For decades, the food industry brushed off concerns, marketing margarine as a healthier alternative, while deep fryers across America sizzled with heart-clogging oils. The science was catching up, though, and by the early 2000s, studies confirmed what researchers had suspected for years. Trans fats were among the worst fats you could consume. Regulations followed, and by 2015, the FDA officially declared trans fats unsafe. Companies scrambled to reformulate products, and today margarine isn't what it used to be. While fried food never went out of style, the days of trans fat-loaded cooking oils are over. Remember when Campbell's cream of mushroom soup and canned tuna were the stars of the food aisle back in the day? Well, Grandma took those humble ingredients and spun them into her classic tuna noodle casserole. During the 1950s and 1960s, convenience foods were all the rage, and tuna noodle casserole fit the bill perfectly. It was a post-World War II creation and was whipped up in no time with ingredients already on hand. Plus, it was classic comfort food that brought everyone together at Grandma's dinner table. During the mid-20th century, tuna noodle casserole was a mainstay in American cookbooks and cooking magazines. It was often featured in advertisements and promoted as a quick and easy dish for the busy homemaker. This one fell out of favor, but thanks to the recent revival of noodle dishes, we might see this one back on the menu soon. In the meantime, why not dust off Grandma's old cookbooks and bring it back yourself? Speaking of how different things were in their time due to economical strife, one thing that got really popular back when your grandparents were still young was sausage gravy and biscuits. This might seem like an outlandish combo to us today, and we admit it takes a bit of getting used to, but the magic is all in the gravy. Biscuits and gravy are already something Americans have been pretty accustomed to eating, especially in the 20th century. But innovation is one of the finer points of the country, and culinary matters are no exception. People eventually found out that using pork sausage, crumbles, enriched the gravy and made it irresistible, especially if they were smoked. Usually, biscuits like jumbo buttermilk ones make for a great side to the dish, but even the gravy alone was worth eating on its own. Divinity is this super fluffy, cloud-like candy that popped up in the U.S. early in the 20th century. It's mostly whipped up from egg whites, sugar, and corn syrup, and often you'll find nuts like pecans or walnuts thrown in for a nice crunch. Making Divinity can be tricky because humidity can totally mess with it, but when you get it right, it's like eating a sweet, airy piece of heaven. It got super popular around the holidays because it's a blast to make with family and tastes like a festive treat. Over time, though, as quicker, easier sweets came around, not as many folks made it from scratch. It's usually scooped onto wax paper to set into little clouds, sometimes topped with a nut. You know how America and pulled pork go together like jam on toast, right? After all, It's something you can feed a whole crowd and have them feeling full and satisfied. It's a showstopper, but you can make a lot of easy things with it. Most dishes you can make and serve will have people asking you what your recipe is, but that's just how easy pulled pork is to work with. So when I say this next sentence, hear it with an open mind. How do you feel about cherry cola pulled pork? Yeah, slow-cooked, barbecuey, savory, pulled pork, left to simmer in a pool of cherry cola barbecue sauce and other seasonings. The first time I heard of this dish, I struggled just to imagine all of those flavors in one bite. Barbecue sauce is a dip, pulled pork is a main dish, and cherry cola is a drink. You're used to having all that separately, right? Despite that, since it was all made from things that were so readily available in most homes, and since it was right up the alley of home chefs in their slow-cooking era, it took off in a major way, especially in the South, where everything involved in this dish is something people were already having on a daily basis. A crisp autumn day in the 1970s wasn't complete without a trip to the local farm stand. Fresh apples, homemade pies, and of course a jug of unpasteurized apple cider, cloudy, rich, and straight from the press. It was a seasonal tradition, the kind of drink you poured into a glass and sipped cold or warmed up on the stove with a cinnamon stick. No labels, no expiration dates, just fresh-pressed fruit in its purest form. For generations, farm-fresh juices were a staple, especially in rural areas where people trusted their local orchards. The juice was made by simply crushing fruit and collecting the liquid. No heat treatment, no extra processing, and because it wasn't filtered, it had that distinct pulpy texture that store-bought juice just couldn't match. But as food safety research advanced, so did concerns over harmful bacteria like E. coli and Salmonella. Unpasteurized juice, while natural, carried risks, especially for children and the elderly. By the 1990s, regulations tightened, requiring warning labels and, in many cases, pasteurization for commercial sale. While you can still find raw cider at some farm stands, it often comes with a disclaimer. In the 1950s, green bean casserole started out as a traditional Thanksgiving meal, but because of how much everyone loved it, it soon became a year-round delicacy. This one was also created as a creative way to market Campbell's cream of mushroom soup. When canned soups first hit the food aisle at grocery stores, many people were skeptical about them. Introducing new recipes was a way of encouraging people to add them to their daily meals, and Grandma really followed through with this one. The original recipe, known as the green bean bake, was developed by Dorcas Riley, a home economist at Campbell. It combined green beans, cream of mushroom soup, and fried onions, and it was published in the company's recipe booklet. Our sweet old grandmas decided to make this one better by adding their own twists to the original recipe. Although traditionally rich and creamy, there were lighter versions of green bean casserole that used lower-fat ingredients or alternative toppings to make it healthier. Southern skillet cornbread has been a beloved memento of the South for many decades to the rest of the nation, but in the area, it is a tradition that goes back all the way to the 18th century. History books tell us that it comes from Native American cuisine, and it makes sense since a lot of Native American cuisine was very cost-effective. It is kind of everything you would want in a home-cooked meal. Easy on the wallet, simple ingredients you can find at any nearby store, and little prep time, which means you can get your cravings fulfilled immediately. Plus, most cooks back then were so accustomed to it from a lifetime of making cornbread in these cast-iron skillets that they could make it much faster than even an experienced cook. Guess experience counts for something, especially when you have 40 to 50 years of it, right? Magic Pan crepe cakes come from those Magic Pan restaurants that made crepe dishes a big deal back in the 60s and 70s. Here's how they do it. They layer up thin crepes with all sorts of fillings, from sweet creams and fruits to savory cheeses and spinach. Basic crepe batter is pretty simple, just flour, eggs, milk, and butter. But when you stack them up and fill them just right, it turns into something special. Each layer was carefully assembled to ensure the flavors melded beautifully, providing a gourmet experience that was rare at the time. These crepe cakes were a hit because you could watch them being made right in front of you, which was pretty cool back then. Though they were a favorite for a while, as the Magic Pan spots closed down and eating out got more casual, crepe cakes weren't as common. When they served them, it was always with style, dressed up with a little sauce or a sprinkle of powdered sugar to make them look as good as they tasted. Pork cassoulet was what you went for as far as everyday meals go if you wanted to work some pork into the weekly diet. Pork cassoulet featured pork shoulders, or sausages in particular, and some of the typical ingredients you're used to seeing with savory dishes: tomatoes, onions, garlic, all your usual suspects, except this time it uses white beans, like Great Northern beans. The reason you used a crock pot, particularly for this, is that it is a stew and the pork needs to be browned. Now you can include breadcrumbs for a crunch on top, but it kind of messes with the stew-centric vibe, so people used to leave them out. As far as the flavor goes, this is all savory, and it does not hide that fact from you at all. The slow cooking really lets everything combine into one massive profile that feels like it's made up of many different flavors instead of a lot of tastes, fighting for which one gets to stand out the most. When this was popular, pork was leagues more affordable than it is today, and the fact that you could either make this into a stew or a casserole meant that a lot of families found a lot of use for it. It fit the tastes of almost every prolific area in the country, like California, the Pacific, or the South, and it did great at keeping everyone full. In the 1970s, home canning was more than just a hobby. It was a way to stretch the grocery budget and keep the pantry stocked year-round. Families filled their shelves with jars of green beans, corn, and carrots, all preserved with time-tested methods passed down through generations. But while fruits and jams could be safely canned with a boiling water bath, low-acid vegetables were another story. Without a pressure cooker, those innocent-looking jars could turn into ticking time bombs for botulism. For years, many home canners relied on boiling water alone, believing that if it was sealed, it was safe. Some added aspirin or vinegar, thinking it would help ward off bacteria. Others simply trusted the process. After all, their grandparents had done it. The problem? Clostridium botulinum, the bacteria behind botulism, thrives in low-oxygen, low-acid environments like improperly canned vegetables. It doesn't change the taste, smell, or appearance of food, making it nearly impossible to detect until symptoms appear. As cases of botulism poisoning mounted, food safety officials began cracking down, emphasizing the need for pressure canning. Eaters, what's not to love about a creamy sauce and some noodles all drenched in cheese? The French also made a significant contribution to delicious casseroles with the easy shepherd's pie. It was a meaty casserole traditionally made with lamb meat. Shepherd's pie has its roots in British cuisine. The name shepherd's pie specifically refers to the use of lamb, while cottage pie is used when beef is the main ingredient. This one was an easy one to make as it didn't require hours of preparation. The dish became popular in the UK during the 19th century, particularly after the introduction of potatoes in the late 18th century. This one was used for meal prep, as it was great for making ahead and freezing. It was known as hachis parmentier in French cuisine, but different countries came up with their own version of the shepherd's pie. In Australia and New Zealand, it's often called cottage pie, and in some places, the dish includes sweet potatoes or other unique toppings. There are some baking challenges that only your grandmother is equipped for, and making the pinnacle of brown butter sweet potato pies was one of them. Seriously, even bakeries and fancy patisseries have struggled to nail every aspect of a pie. But for most home chefs in the United States, it seems to be just another Tuesday with the oven. You take a flaky pie crust with a velvety potato filling that is usually topped off with whipped cream. But most older cooks preferred maple syrup, as that was what they grew up with. Just a bit of dark brown sugar would elevate this dish into the perfect dessert, though it would often steal the show entirely on its own. The thing is built to make your mouth water, and we mean looks-wise too, since the brown and caramel hues of the pie just make it all the more enticing. Have you ever heard of this one before, and would you try it? The Watergate cake, popping up in the 70s, was all about riding the wave of the famous scandal it's named after. This pistachio-flavored cake, made with pistachio pudding, mixed sports a funky green color and a nutty taste, lightened up with some club soda. It's usually decked out with a frosting that's also got pudding in it and sprinkled with pecans, making for a pretty unique look and texture. The whole novelty of its theme and the connection to a wild moment in politics helped make it a hit, but as people started digging more natural and less artificially flavored sweets, its star faded. Watergate cake was typically a sheet cake, super easy to slice up for casual gatherings. As far as everyday meals go, it gets pretty hard to outdo candied carrots if you're a middle-class home in the mid-1900s, as I'm sure many of you can relate to today as well. The little goblin in your brain that demands a sugar rush every other day for comfort is something humans throughout time have experienced. How did they get their fix? Well, you couldn't just get a caramel mocha frap from Starbucks like today, but you could take some carrots, boil them, and coat them in a glaze that was made from honey, maple syrup, brown sugar, and butter. Not really something that would suit the tastes of today, right? But don't knock it until you try it, because it actually did really well. Candied food was this entire niche genre of cooking back then that got popular. The whole glaze aspect was something people loved applying to every dish to see what sticks. These were a side dish that also worked for kids, so they got a lot of mileage out of family gatherings and dinner parties. But even besides that, it's still a great way to work some carrots into your diet. As far as the taste goes, they definitely hit home. It feels like any other treat you'd be eating. Though when we think of candy today, we might be more used to hard and mushy textures like in hard licorice or sour candies. This was tender, though, and it would melt in your mouth. By the 1970s, the diet food industry was booming. With calorie counting in full swing, people were looking for ways to satisfy their sweet tooth without the guilt. Saccharin became the answer. Found in everything from diet sodas to sugar-free desserts, it was a game-changer, hundreds of times sweeter than sugar, yet with none of the calories. It didn't taste exactly like sugar, but for those determined to stay slim, it was close enough. Saccharin had actually been around since the late 1800s, but it wasn't until the mid-20th century that it took over the diet market. People stirred it into their coffee, poured it over cereal, and downed it in soft drinks like Tab. It was everywhere, until scientists started raising concern. In the early 1970s, studies linked saccharin to bladder cancer in lab rats, setting off alarm bells. The FDA responded by mandating warning labels on products containing the sweetener, effectively scaring off a lot of consumers. Despite the controversy, saccharin never fully disappeared. Later research suggested the rat studies didn't translate directly to humans, and by 2000, the cancer warning was removed. Today, it's still around, though it competes with newer artificial sweeteners. Back then, though, it was the diet craze's best friend, until it wasn't. Cheese and potatoes are like a match made in heaven, and Grandma's cheesy scalloped potatoes was straight out of any cheese lover's dream, so this casserole tastes even better than it looked. And let me tell you, it looked finger-licking delicious. The term scalloped comes from the French word escalope, which originally referred to thin slices of meat. However, in the case of scalloped potatoes, it refers to the thinly sliced potatoes used in the dish. Many grandmas used old-fashioned methods to make their cheesy scalloped potatoes, including hand-slicing the potatoes thinly, layering them with love, and cooking them slowly. Some even added secret ingredients they swear by, like a dash of nutmeg, a hint of garlic, or even a sprinkle of paprika for added flavor. The best part about this one was its crispy crust, and I'm sure you remember fighting all your siblings for the bigger chunk of it. This dish wasn't only tasty, but was also practical. It was a one-pot wonder, meaning it could be cooked and served in the same dish, making cleanup a breeze. I'm sure Grandma loved that. A lot of the recipes from the times of our parents come from the Depression and from when America was recovering from it. But things like baked ziti is what they would whip up when they had a bit of money in their pocket. Some cooked ziti, ricotta cheese, eggs, and spaghetti sauce meant for an incredibly easy and amazing pasta. If you had the Parmesan to spare, you could also sprinkle it on or add a melted layer as a topping. It did not take too long to make, and it tasted very different from regular pasta or spaghetti and meatballs, which was a recipe favored by moms more than grandmas. The real highlight of the dish is in the shape of the ziti, since they end up being these 2.5 to 3 centimeters tubes. When they turn into soft pasta, they become great for chewing and work really well with the cheese. Grandmas would always spice it up with some beef or duck here and there. Brownies or blondies, mix it up with brown sugar, butter, flour, eggs, and baking powder, all jazzed up with butterscotch chips. These goodies swapped out chocolate for a sweet caramel-like vibe and caught on fast. They were super easy to whip up, making them a go-to for anyone needing a quick dessert fix without the intense richness of chocolate. Their ease of preparation and ability to store well made them popular for potlucks, school functions, and holiday treat exchanges. Over time, though, as bakers got more into gourmet and unique flavors, blondies weren't the main event anymore. Usually you'd find them cut into squares, laid out on a platter, perfect for grabbing a bite without any fuss. The combo of a chewy middle with a bit of crunch around the edges really made these stand out. Snowball cakes are all about that winter vibe with their fluffy marshmallow filling and a coating of shredded coconut that looks just like snow. Inside, there's a chocolate sponge cake that keeps everything rich and interesting. These treats got their name from their cool, snowball-like appearance, making them a hit during the holiday season. They used to be all over the place as prepackaged snacks from brands like Hostess, known for their fun and distinctive look. But as people started choosing more natural and less processed options, snowball cakes kind of faded out. They were usually wrapped up all neat, making them easy to grab and go. Like cobbler? Then you need to hear about the wonderful blueberry ones everyone used to make in their crock-pots. It isn't really a secret that cobbler is an everyday dessert in most American households, and it's been that way for longer than either you or I have been around. It'll stay that way after everyone we know is gone, too. Some things are just generational like that. Blueberry cobbler used to be made in crock pots back then to really let it absorb the flavor. And since you could just leave the dessert to bask in the flavors on its own, people started making it so much more. After crock pots went mainstream and most households had one, sales for lots of berries and fruits went up because of how easy it became to make desserts surrounding them. Blueberries definitely weren't an exception. And the best part was that you could make this at any time of the year and it would still work. Like, you know how some people don't like having hot chocolate outside of winter? You'd never get any concerns like that with a blueberry cobbler. There was always someone ready to eat a whole plate. In the 70s, lighting up a cigarette at the dinner table wasn't just allowed, it was expected. Restaurants had ashtrays on every table. Waiters took orders through a haze of smoke, And no one batted an eye if you alternated bites of steak with puffs of a Marlboro. Whether at home, in a diner, or even on an airplane, smoking while eating was just part of the culture. But as medical studies piled up linking secondhand smoke to serious health risks, the public's tolerance started to shift. The first major bans started in the late 80s, and by the 2000s, smoking in restaurants was virtually extinct. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment down below with your favorite dish from this list. So, whether you've made these dishes yourself with your own hands, or just remember the way they used to taste when Grandma made them in her kitchen, I hope this video brought back a little piece of home for you and stirred up some precious memories. And if you're fortunate enough to still have Grandma's handwritten recipes tucked away in a kitchen drawer somewhere, gathering dust and waiting, dust them off, make something completely from scratch the way she used to, and pass it along to someone who matters in your life. That's exactly how we keep the good stuff alive for future generations and honor the women who came before us.